welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Ferrell, Tata, and I am pleased to welcome Sam Fabian. She is with Children's Hospital of the King's Daughter, and she is a parent educator. And today our issue is youth, and we are specifically talking about parenting teenagers, which is something I know will be very important to a lot of parents. So thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So Sam, what advice, I'm going to hit it right off the butt, what advice can you give parents about navigating the teen years?
I think first and foremost, remember to breathe. I think oftentimes it's very overwhelming, all the things that the teens are going through, from trying to be organized for school, understanding where they belong in their peer group, and following the family rules. And so it's really important just to breathe, step back, and number one, enjoy them. I think a lot of times as parents, our number one thing that we want to do is enjoy our kids. That's why we had them. But during the teen years, we often get really caught up on what they're not doing right, and we forget that they're doing so many wonderful things right and not so much wrong. But we take pride in our kids, and so we need to enjoy them and just really embrace all the fun, quirky, even difficult times. And this is part of growing up. This is how they're going to grow into a wonderful, responsible, respectful adult. And so the first thing is enjoy them. The next thing you want to do is nurture them. I think a lot of times they are going through so many things internally, they're not verbalizing it, and so you don't know what's going on. So you have a fear as a parent of, they're not doing this, or they're doing this on purpose. This is why they're not doing this. They just want to get at me. And what's happening is that they're confused. They're like, do I belong? Well, who do I belong to? What peer group? Do I fit in? Am I loved? Am I capable of loving? And so they're not telling you they're having these fears and these feelings, and so they're kind of taking it in all by themselves. So you really have to nurture them and remind them they're doing great, that you love them. Don't be afraid to tell them. They may not want that kiss. They just might want the pound, but to say, hey, you know what? I just love being your mom. It's the greatest gift. Or, I just love hanging with you and watching you tool with, your bike or their favorite hobby. And just remind them that that is just awesome, and that you love watching them do that. So really nurture their gifts, nurture their interests, even if you don't like them. So you want to enjoy them, you want to nurture them, you want to guide them. I think so many times we forget that they are just like toddlers. Actually, there's lots of research out there that compares toddlers and teens, very similar in their development. So think for a moment. Teens, they like to explore and get into things, right? They like to drive fast, have that exhilaration. They like to maybe walk the fine line of breaking curfew or doing something they're not supposed to. Well, toddlers, think about it. All the times that they're getting into trouble, digging into the dirt, they're experimenting, they want to see what it's like. And so very similar in wanting to learn and explore. They also put a lot of things into their mouths. As toddlers, think about it. Teens are exploring that too. So we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, on how to help teens navigate some of those high-risk behaviors they may engage in, like drugs and alcohol. So toddlers and teens are very similar, and who do they need to help guide them and teach them? Us parents.
Absolutely. That's wonderful advice. That's really helpful. And so often we know that teens do act in ways that are kind of baffling to parents. So what do you say to parents that are often their thought is, what are you thinking?
Well, what I say to parents is a lot of times they weren't thinking. And not because they can't, it's because they're totally overwhelmed in the brain. I often tell parents, think of the brain as, when everything's going well, they can think, they can make good decisions, but when there's stress in their life, it's like concrete being poured over their brain and they can't think and things are fuzzy. But that's true for everybody. So when you are asked to do something that you don't know anything about, or you forgot to prepare, you stress even more. Or you think you know where you're going when you're driving, and then all of a sudden you realize you're lost, and what happens? You panic inside. And so that happens to everybody, not just to teens. But it's specifically for teens. Guess what's happening? In toddlers, remember I told you, their brain is developing. We say we have to nurture them. It's the most important part of their lives, to make connections and attachment. Well, guess what happens in the teen brain? They have found in the last 10 to 15 years, the brain has a new insurgent of brain connections and development. And so it's really important for parents to understand understand that brain development and what is going on, because the prefrontal cortex, this part right here, is responsible for judgment, organization, and so guess what happens during adolescence? During adolescence, that part of the brain is asleep, oftentimes.
No.
So
That
here
would
we are. You
explain a
can't.
lot.
Well, when we have a headache or we're thinking, what do we touch? We touch right here.
Right.
That's the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain. So as a parent, if you just understand that that part of the brain is under great new development and it is kind of asleep, if you will, they need you to help them stay organized, to help them be confident about what they're going to do, maybe in school or on the sports field, help them communicate, because it's asleep. And so we often think they should know better. They do, but they need your help. Just like a toddler writing on a wall, right?
Right.
And so you walk in the room and the toddler stops. And what do we say as a parent when the toddler stops? They knew better. They did know better, but only when the parent was there to help trigger the brain to say, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to do that. Because in a toddler, the impulse control functions are not developed yet.
And sometimes just when they see you, they know, I've got to stop that.
That's right, because the trigger, it triggered something in the brain to say, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to do that. But who did they need to do that?
Yes.
They needed the parent. Just like a teen still needs you, even though they know how to clean the room, they know how to do their homework, they know they have to get, tell you about what they need for school. They need you to help them keep that organized. And we'll talk more about the brain a little bit later, but it's really important for parents to understand that the teens are not just doing that because they're lazy. And so we really don't want to label our kids as such.
It's so helpful, and you seem so kind as a parent, but there are those times when they have these rough spots, and even if there's a reason, how do you help parents, nurture them through that and guide them without losing it?
That's a great question, and you just actually said without losing it. And I'm a parent, and I've had my moments, and no parent is perfect. And we have to remember that, is that we're not perfect parents, and so if we try to be perfect, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So the first and foremost, when working with our teen, especially if they've got our blood pressure up, is that don't work with your teen if your blood pressure is up, and what I call if you're in the red zone. Meaning you are yelling, your voice is raised, you're accusing them, you're not giving them, you're not saying very kind things. At that point, a parent needs to step back, take a deep breath, literally, and get themselves into what I call the green zone so they can respond. Because when kids make us so upset that we want to scream and disappoint us, our reaction is to yell back or to say things that aren't very nice. So we really do have to get ourselves in a calm, regulated state, in a green zone. And then say, wow, you really took me by surprise. And if you did yell and scream or whatever, you need to repair the damage and say, you know what? You really took me off guard when you broke curfew again, and that you didn't tell me that you had a little fender bender. And I said, I was angry, and I should have never screamed and yelled at you, but I'm calm now, and so I'm ready to hear and listen to what happened and what you have to tell me about what happened last night.
So what about a father and mother? If one father or one parent comes down harder on the child, and then the mom is more understanding, how do you counsel the parents as to coming together as a team?
Well, I think you just said it again. The operative word is coming together as a team. Parenting on the same page is what we call it. And it's really important before you even have children, so those new moms and dads out there, is to really talk about what your philosophy of parenting is, what your family rules will be as the children grow, because it changes as they grow, and to have a pact that, when our children mess up, that we talk first, and we have a united front. And yes, there's some good cop, bad cop, and the kids will figure that out too, as to who to go to if there is a good cop, bad cop situation or style. But I still recommend that you jointly talk about what's going on and come to a consensus. So I often say when they come to me, my kids come to me, I say, well, have you talked to your dad? And if not, then I need to talk to your dad before we let you know the answer.
Yeah, that's good to have that united front.
But sometimes that's not the case if parents are in the military or on business trips or divorced, single parents. So that's not always going to be the simple answer. So at that case, give yourself permission to take a moment and say, let me think about this. And you may have a confidant, you know, a parent or a friend that you will want to talk about it through with, or just say, you know, give me some time, and I may have some questions for you before I can give you an answer on that.
That's great.
If you come back and say, well, last time, you know, you didn't come home on time, or last time you didn't put your bike away, whatever the situation is, or, you know, if you just start telling them all the negative things, you're breaking up the relationship. So no matter what the situation, it's so important for parents to look at the situation. How am I nurturing, or how am I breaking apart our connection as, you know, mother and son, father and son, daughter, etc. So it's.
And what would you say to parents who, I'm sure there are people watching that have blown it, they have lost it, and you know, how can that be healed and recovered?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times we forget that we can apologize to our children for what we said, how we acted, but we still hold them accountable for whatever situation happened, whether they, you know, broke curfew, didn't finish an assignment, got kicked out of school for some reason, I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, experimented with drugs or alcohol. Either way, we have to apologize for the way we interacted. Nobody likes, I mean, would you want to be screamed at by your boss for something you didn't do, intentionally or intentionally, you know? But most kids don't do things intentionally wrong. They're just not thinking. And parents also have to realize that too, is that they didn't speed and get that ticket intentionally to get pulled over. You know, they didn't intentionally be late for curfew. Typically they don't intentionally get in trouble. It's just that their brain was not working. They got caught up in the moment, the emotion, and they didn't have the skill to regulate. And we forget as parents that that's a skill. Think about how hard it is not to scream and yell at our kids when we're angry. It is a skill to self-regulate. And so, repairing is very, very possible. And you may not be in the frame of mind to repair and go to your child and apologize for the way you interacted with them. So it might be later in the day, you know, at the end of the day when they're about to go to bed, tuck into their room and say, hey, you know what, I didn't like how we interacted. You know, yeah, I'm still not real pleased with what you did, but I don't like how I interacted with you, and I hope I can improve on that. That's okay to do that.
Yeah, that's I think that's really healthy.
Well, what you're doing is you're modeling.
Right.
You're modeling
You're
what
teaching them, when they mess up, that they can go and repair.
That's right.
We only have a few minutes left before we break, but I know a lot of parents, they want to communicate with their children. They desire that, but then when they, you know, how was your day? Fine. You know, they don't, the response they get is not.
It's not favorable or just really short.
Right.
A couple things is, don't ask that question as soon as they walk in the door. Just say, hey, glad you're home. You know, I'm cooking dinner. Let them know what you're doing right there at the moment.
Yeah, that's good.
And then just give them some breathing, because you don't know what kind of stressors they took on during the day. We think our kids just go off to school, they got it easy, and they have no stressors. But they do. They worry about what they wear. They worry about what they fit in. If someone said a negative comment, all of that they're carrying with them still. And so when they walk in that door, they need someone to just greet them, give them some breathing space. Then when you gather around the dinner table, and I recommend families have a family dinner. It is a safe time for teens just to sit and have it safe for them. It's not the time to have heavy-duty discussions about things, but then you share with them what your day was like, what happened at work. My daughter always loved to hear about who was pregnant, what kind of party, or what kind of shower gifts we were getting her. And then before I knew it, she was cutting me off and telling me about her day.
Wow.
So you don't have to ask that question if you first include them in your day.
That's a great advice. Sam, Fabian, we are so excited to have you here. You've had some great tips for parenting, and we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the actual development of the brain development, and how that affects our teenagers. Thank you.
Every day is so wonderful, and suddenly it's hard to breathe. Now and then I get insecure from all the pain. I'm so ashamed.
Would it be okay if I sat here?
I
Reaching out. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to Joy in Our Town. We are continuing our conversation with Sam Fabian. She is a parent educator with Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. Today, our issue is youth, and this segment, we are going to be talking about the development of the teenage mind. So welcome back, and thank you for staying with us today. So when is the brain fully developed?
Well, the actual size of the brain is usually developed by age 6. But that's just the size. So you have the size of your brain at age 6. But as you know, the first 3 years of life, they have said over and over again, the most important. But what they've found, as I've said before, it's later in teens. They have found that the brain, especially between the onset of puberty or adolescence, is it's about 11 to 14, is they're finding that that's the most increased brain activity and connections that are being developed in the brain. And it's basically you use it or you lose it in the brain. And so for adolescents, it begins at adolescence, 11 years of age. And so that first onset of adolescence, puberty, is when they're making new connections and have new opportunities to learn. If empathy's been on the weak side, they have new opportunities to learn about empathy. They have new about judgment, about relationships, about connections. And so it's really an exciting time for the brain. But what that means for the teen brain is that it's not fully functioning as this new growth is happening. And so what we have is basically 3 parts of the brain that impact growth and development. You have the prefrontal cortex, which I referenced earlier. You have the midbrain, which is the limbic area of the brain, the midbrain, which is responsible for emotions and memory. And then you have the back part of the brain, I'm being very simplistic, is where you house the brainstem. And those are very important in the development because, as I noted earlier, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the CEO, the thinking part of the brain, helps them stay organized and stay on task, is kind of asleep and taking siestas once in a while. The middle of the brain is the emotional hub. So this is where they will house their emotions. And so we often think, oh my gosh, I was just talking to my teen. They were fine. And then all of a sudden, I looked at them, or I said something, I mentioned something, and they went from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
An emotional outburst, and we're like baffled. What happened just there? Well, what happened was the emotional aspect of the brain is in overdrive during adolescence. It is just producing lots of hormones and chemicals in which the emotions are just just exploding everywhere. And typically, the CEO would help keep that in check, right?
Right.
What's happening is the CEO is kind of like having a snooze. And so what normally they would be able to handle their emotions like you and I would be, and that we learned that skill about breathing and regulating, the emotions just took over. And then the last part of the brain is the brainstem, and that's our flight or fight response. So that's when, if we're crossing the street, a truck is coming, what do? We flee. We fight. Some teens, when they feel pressured and confused, they'll freeze. And so they won't talk to you. They don't have an answer for you because the stress response is just so overwhelming. The CEO is not helping out. The emotions is going crazy. And the brainstem was just freeze then. Don't do anything. And so that's what we have to understand with the development of the brain, is that it is reorganizing, it's growing, it's developing, and that's why as parents we need to be so patient.
Is there a difference between the boys' and the girls' brain?
Well, development-wise, there is overall. Girls tend to grow and mature quicker than boys. So I say 11 to 14 is the average for girls and boys, but you'll see that along the continuum, both physically and emotionally, girls tend to mature, and socially, a little quicker than guys do. It's the nature of the beast, if you will. And so we as parents have to understand, too, when we compare our kids, that's a real dangerous thing, whether you have only boys or only girls, comparing them, because it is just it's a continuum, and everyone falls on that in different ways. You can have late bloomers, and what I mean by that physically is that you could have, this happened in my family. My 2 boys were constantly called late bloomers. And so when kids their own age in sports and everything else were taller, they had muscle mass, and here are my boys, you know, the typical late bloomers. And I often sat back and said, I wonder what they feel. You know, some of their friends have facial hair. They don't have facial hair. They're taller. They have a deeper voice. And so we have to remember these are all things that take place that they struggle with inside that may not verbalize.
Right. They don't know how to articulate that because they don't have anything to compare it to.
That's right. Or the other end is that you have some kids that are like, for the girls, they already have full developed breasts and have started their cycle, and they're only 11 or 12. And so that's overwhelming, where their friends have no comparison. Like, what? What's that? They've never heard of some of those terms.
Yeah.
So it is a very turbulent time for teens, because not only physically they're going through things through their physical body, but also in their brain, and then socially, emotionally, dealing with all the comparisons that their peers are doing, the TV is doing, telling them how they should look. How, if they look this way, then this is, you know, they'll feel great, and that's really not true. So.
Well, they always talk about hormones. I mean, how does that fit in with the brain development? And
well, it's not, you know, they always think, oh, it's just hormones.
Right.
But it's the connections in the brain that are being made, and it really has to do with that brain development. So yes, hormonally, they're getting surges of hormones, and that is going to affect their mood and their emotions, which normally, if the CEO was working properly, they'd be able to contain that to some degree. So it is a combination, that it's not just hormones that is creating this, you know, a very moody, very expressive teenager. It has to do with the combination of that brain development and the hormones, and the confusion of what's going on in their body.
Right.
And what they're supposed to feeling and what they're not feeling.
And no one's really telling them this, because parents don't know.
Well, and exactly, parents don't know, and they're not having the conversations. They're not inviting the youth, to their teen, to say, hey, you know, hey, I know this was a tough month, or hey, you know, I noticed you got a little facial hair, you know, should we get the razor out? And, you know, gosh, I remember when I was a youth, you know, feeling really uncomfortable and scared. Do you have anything to talk about? Just kind of open-ending it and having that conversation.
Well, I know it's funny, you were talking about earlier about the comparing the teenager to the toddler, and that, when I think about sleep, you know, a toddler needs a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
How much sleep does a teenager need?
Well, you know, it's sleep is food for the brain. Just like the toddlers need, and the infants, they slept forever, 11, 12 hours a day. Toddler needs 11, 12 hours a day. Actually, the infant needs 14. The teenager needs about 9¼ hours of sleep each night. And what else happens?
They're not getting that.
They are not getting it.
Yeah.
And telling them to go to sleep earlier, what is happening is their circadian clock inside of them is also changing with this brain development. And so when we say, well, you need to go to bed earlier, their body's saying, oh no. And actually there is a melatonin surge that takes place. And melatonin typically is lower at night, which helps relaxes the body and can go to sleep. Well, that is not happening. They're actually not having that that surge of melatonin at night. Guess when they're having that? Or at bedtime. They're having it
in the day, during the day?
Yes. So they're, you know, it kind of kicks in. So what are they doing in school?
Right,
So sleepy. So at night, the melatonin level is low, so they're doing their homework at 11 o'clock, and you're like, you need to go to bed, but they're wired. They're like, I'm not tired.
Yeah, and they really aren't.
And they really aren't.
But they need sleep.
But they need sleep. So
what's the answer?
Well, the answer is, on a personal, I think the school system structure has to change. Chesapeake school systems actually have the high schoolers going to school last, and the elementary schools going first. And so that is going to help shift a little bit. So the teenagers are starting school at 9 o'clock versus 7:20 in the morning. So they may be going to bed 12, 1 o'clock, but they're getting a couple more hours of sleep with them starting school later. So some of the school systems have instituted that and understand the importance of sleep and brain development in the teens, and so that's working. So. Of course, there's hope. The other thing is that make sure that they're eating well, that you have healthy snacks in the house, that you have healthy food, that you encourage water drinking. I mean, all of that, keeping the body healthy and modeling that is really, really important. And you want to have no computers in the room. I know teenagers have the laptops and stuff like that, but you want to encourage them to do their homework outside of their bedroom in an open area, and so that when they're done with their homework, the computer closes. And you want to have some rules set about the phones and texting that, you say, you know what, about 30 minutes, optimally an hour before you're ready to hit the sack, if you could just get in the habit of closing that phone, no more texting, no more gaming, no more computer, because the REM sleep is what they need. And with the screen time, that interferes with their REM sleep, which is very important in them getting a good night's sleep.
Right.
So
that's hard to regulate.
It is hard to regulate, but if you start with your teens, so those parents out there that have teens that just are entering the teen years, or even middle school, actually kids are getting a lot of phones in elementary school, is to start the rules now, the guidelines saying, hey, phones are on the kitchen counter before you go upstairs to wind down for the night.
Or even turning them off. A lot of the services you can turn them off between 10 and 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's right, that's right. So really training up and setting the rules and guidelines for TV and computers and phones right from the get-go, and not to take it away. Well, forget it. You got a bad grade, I'm taking your phone away. That is not teaching them anything. And we forget as parents that we are their teachers. We say, well, how do you discipline your kid? And that's what you're asking me.
Right.
Actually, discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to teach.
That's so true.
And so our job...
Back to your original about guide them, we have to guide them.
We have to guide them. And so our job as parents is teachers. And I always ask parents, how do you... what was your best teacher's qualities? And they'll talk about they listened, they, helped explain things to me, they didn't yell at me, they encouraged me. And so I said, what was some of the qualities of your worst teacher? Oh, they yelled at me, they gave me a grade and said, I told you so, or look, I can tell you didn't study. And what happens in the brain, as soon as that negative comments come forward, the brain goes into a stress response. So you've got that fight or flight. You got the emotions now kicking in, and the CEO's not there, so now they rebel. That's a stupid teacher, that's a blah, 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 and then they shut down. So I ask parents, do you want your child, for you to be your child's best teacher or their worst teacher?
Well, Sam, we could go on all day with this. This is such amazing information, and I just thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I really appreciate your coming by today and sharing your expertise as a parent and as a educator. So you have been listening to Joy in Our Town with our guest, Sam Fabian from Children's Hospital, the King's Daughters, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Ferrell Tata.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.